Hello friend, welcome. Today I would like to share a few stories about my mom's Alzheimer's disease and give you a little bit of information about the timeline of her disease progression. Maybe you're here because you have a loved one who either has recently been diagnosed with dementia, or maybe you suspect something and you're just looking for support. Years ago, I did the same thing, and I found a lot of comfort in finding other people who were either going through similar experiences or who had gone through similar experiences. My experience particularly is with my mother, and so maybe that's you. Maybe it's your mom or your dad, and you just kind of need to know what others have experienced and what you might can expect. To start with, it's always a good idea to go over basic terms. I know that if you're familiar with dementia, it may get old hearing it said over and over again, but maybe you don't know. And so a lot of terms, I know before I was intimately familiar with dementia, I didn't necessarily know the difference of different types and things. So dementia is just an umbrella term for a lot of things. There are a bunch of different types of dementia, Alzheimer's disease being the most common one. Some of the other ones include Lewy body dementia, vascular dementia, frontotemporal dementia, and even there can be dementia related to Parkinson's disease. But my experience is going to be primarily with Alzheimer's disease. So to give you a broad overview of the timeline of my mom's disease progression, it was 2011 when we very first began to realize that she was showing signs of disease. It was 5 years later before she received the official diagnosis, and it was another 5 years, for a total of 10 years, before she passed away. Now, I have heard that Alzheimer's disease begins very many years before the first set of symptoms. So if dementia could potentially begin up to 20 years before the first onset of symptoms, that means she may have begun this disease progression all the way back in 1991, which is mind-boggling to me. But Alzheimer's disease is just mind-boggling. You can try as you may to make sense of things, and it just doesn't make sense. So who was my mom before dementia? Just very briefly, I would say that she was the life of the party. Not that she was a party girl, but she was kind and loving, and people loved being with her. People loved being in her home. She was hospitable, and she was a registered nurse. She was very gifted at nursing, and she was great. She worked in all kinds of different nursing environments, and very hardworking and active. She loved flowers and birds and nature, and she was my dad's greatest support in his farming love, and she was just a wonderful person, and I'd never heard anyone say anything bad about her. As I said, in 2011, towards the end of 2011, is when my dad came to me and told me that he was suspecting that she was having some memory problems. And he feared that it might be the dreaded Alzheimer's disease, but he had a hope that maybe it was something else. Maybe there was a tumor that could be removed and it could be fixed, or maybe it was something fixable. But somehow I think we both just knew. And I can't explain how we knew that early. There were, I've written down a number of stories of just things that happened. I can't pinpoint the dates for all of these things, but most of these things happened in that first 5 years before the official diagnosis. So one of them was my dad used to travel for a work that he was doing, and she would go with him sometimes. And my sons were probably about 3, 8, and 10 at the time, and they decided to take the boys on this work trip 4 hours from home. And while my dad was in meetings, my mom was going to take the boys to do fun things. So the first thing that she took them to do was to go to Toys R Us. Remember Toys R Us? I don't think they have those anymore. She let them each pick out a toy, and then she told them they couldn't open the toys because they were going to Incredible Pizza, which is, if you're not familiar with Incredible Pizza, is obviously a pizza restaurant with a big arcade, all kinds of games and things to do. A very fun place. And she was, so proud of herself for going to do these fun things with the kids. But the 3-year-old, being a 3-year-old, could not understand why he couldn't open his new toy. And he threw a fit. Now, typically, my mom was very good at handling the kids, and she had no problem disciplining them when necessary and just making things work. But she called me in a panic and very angry with me for how my child was behaving. What was I to do? 4 hours away. And I knew something was wrong. Like, this is not like her to not be able to handle this. Some other things that I noticed with her were just, how I said that she was so likable and kind and helpful, and she wanted to make a difference in people's lives. But I found that there would be instances where, one in particular, this young lady who was about my age was kind of needing a mother figure in her life, was wanting a mentor to kind of teach her how to do some things and just be an older mentor to her. And so she asked my mom if she would do that. And I remember my mom just being very ugly about it, like not understanding why this girl wanted her to do that. And I remember being very hurt and confused by her critical spirit about it. And she would also be very critical about things related to family stuff at Thanksgiving. And she always, I won't say always, but she often hosted our family Thanksgivings. And I think she was starting to struggle with the planning, and she would be upset with people for maybe not helping as much as she thought that they should, but yet she wouldn't ask them to help. And she would complain about what she had to do. And again, it just wasn't like her. I remember that during this period of this 5-year period of time, her sister became very ill and ended up passing away in the middle of that time. And in her sister's last days, she went to visit her, but being the nurse that she was, I would have expected her to want to be right there and at her sister's bedside the whole time until her death. And she didn't. She actually went on the out of town trip with my dad that he would often go on. I knew something was very, very wrong when my dad had had some kind of a procedure. I think it was a gallbladder procedure. And he had kidney disease. And so one of his symptoms of his kidney disease is his potassium would get really high. And when his potassium would get high, he would have severe nausea. And it was very distinctive. Like, it was different than other types of nausea. And I remember going to the hospital after he had had this procedure, and he's struggling with nausea post-surgery. And we're sitting there, and I look up at his IV bag. You know, they're giving him fluids after the procedure. And I read the IV bag, and it has potassium in it, which is normal. Like, that's a normal routine thing that they would do to give fluids with some potassium in it. But for him, as I see him sitting there struggling, obviously with high potassium, he doesn't need it. He doesn't need the potassium. And my mother, the nurse, just like totally discounts it and doesn't see any problem with it. She's like, well, it's not very much. I'm like, he doesn't need any though. He doesn't need any. And I had to kind of take over, and some other things were going on in that hospital room that day, and she ended up getting upset, and she went home and she let me stay with him, which was not normal because she was his caregiver, and she took that very seriously. There were lots of different little things like that that would happen that just told us something wasn't right. And so we began to try to get a diagnosis, and that was a struggle because she was in denial. She thought that she was just normal, that it was normal to forget things. And her friends and even some of our family weren't helpful because in an effort to just try to make her feel better, they would say, well, I forget things all the time. And it is normal, like we all forget things. But when you're so close to someone, you know when it's different. And I am not being critical of any of the friends or family who didn't see it at the time, because I know just from observing other people who their close family tell me something's going on and I don't necessarily see it. I know it's different when you're that close to somebody. And so don't lose heart if people are telling you that you're the crazy one. That person is fine when you know that they're not. And also, try not to be that person. Try to keep an open mind. If someone's telling you that something's not right, maybe look a little closer and give them a little more credit for knowing their loved one. In May of 2016, we finally received the official diagnosis. Getting to the diagnosis was hard because she didn't really want to do the testing, and she was very belligerent about a lot of that. I remember that my dad would drive by the office where some of the testing had been done, and he would ask her if she wanted to stop there, and she, no, I don't, because she remembered that those people didn't make her happy. But she got the official diagnosis. It was moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease was the official diagnosis. And she took those papers and she went and wanted to tell people herself. And sometimes she could say it, and sometimes she would just hand the papers over for people to read. And it was sad. It was heartbreaking because she knew. She knew it was true at that time. Um, but that's so hard to accept. And going on from there, it was kind of then back and forth. We weren't sure. Did she really know or did she not? I think she would begin to forget that she had the diagnosis. Near the end of 2017, everything began to shift. At that time, my dad had to receive a kidney transplant, and the call came to go get the transplant at night. He was out of town. She was home in bed, asleep. And because he was out of town, there were some things that he needed from the house for me to bring to him to meet him at the hospital. Therefore, I couldn't just let my mom sleep through the night, but I had to go wake her up. And so I go and wake her up, which is not good. Not having a good routine and having sleep at night for someone with dementia is not good. But I wake her up and take her to the hospital was 2 hours away. We sit up all night and all the next day. And finally, by about 7 o'clock the next evening, she and I were able to go to some friend's house nearby. She had ridden to the friend's house with them, and I came later. By the time I got there, I'm just absolutely exhausted. I can't hold my eyes open. And she has new life. She's not slept in who knows how long, but it's like a whole new day. Like she's gone to visit her friends. And she kept asking me, "Are you sick? What's wrong with you?" "No, I haven't slept. How are you even functioning?" So that was interesting. At that time, we had to have other people kind of help see after her and take care of her during that recovery period. But she really wanted to be at the hospital with her husband, my dad. And at one point, I had taken her home and I took her vehicle to my house, which is on the same property. The next morning early, I was going to be leaving to go back to the hospital, but I wasn't taking her, but I would be taking her vehicle. And when I arrived at the hospital, I opened the back hatch and her bags were there, which meant she had walked to my house in the dark in the night, put her bags in the car, and she tried to drive away. Thankfully, I had not left the keys in the car, or who knows what that story would have ended up being. But that was the day that I had to be the one to make her stop driving. And that was hard. And that began the process of her forgetting me over the next several months. I became the other woman, the woman who just showed up and started taking care of her husband. And you can imagine that was hard on both of us, on all of us. The next 3.5 years from 2018 to the summer of 2021 were just survival mode, literal survival mode. Some of the things that we had to do were take turns taking care of her. My dad would have to hold back on some of the things that he would normally be doing because he needed to be with her, or he would have to make sure that I could stay with her or someone else could. At one point, I had become sick, and he got desperate, and he had to start putting her in the back seat of the truck with the child lock on so that he could drive around the farm and do some of the things that needed to be done and keep her safe. There was a brief stint of time that we did put her in memory care. It was always intended to be temporary. My dad was going to be having a surgery on his foot, and so he made the decision to just do like a month stay in a memory care facility just for his surgery and recovery. Just so happened that that was during the pandemic, at the beginning of it. And he was so wrapped up in her care that he didn't even realize that stuff was happening with this pandemic and that the world was about to shut down. And so she'd only been there for a couple of days when everything locked down. And then we couldn't go in and see her anymore. His surgery got canceled, but yet he'd already paid for her to stay. And that was thousands of dollars. And so he went ahead just for the respite and left her there for the month. And when we got her out, she was not in good shape at all. She had a UTI and so confused. It was awful. And being that it was that early part of the pandemic, it just made it, I'm sure it compounded things so much. Fast forward a couple of months and his surgery got rescheduled, and we had a dear, dear angel friend who was kind enough to keep her in her home for that recovery period. And it was the biggest blessing. I know it was so hard for her and her husband to do, but we are still so eternally grateful for them in their sacrificial love of us during that time. I often ended up being the person that my dad leaned on for support. I know that he would try to not share everything, but he shared a lot. And I had to remain strong for him. And thankfully, I had so many people to lean on to be strong for me so that I could lift him up. In the fall of 2020, her disease had progressed enough that she qualified to be on hospice care. Now, a lot of people believe that hospice is just for like the very last weeks or months of life. There are different rules when it comes to dementia diagnoses for hospice. And so she qualified for that, and it was a great blessing to be able to have not only nurses come in, but someone to come in and help bathe her, and occasionally to cook meals, and a chaplain to come in. And the chaplain was wonderful because he could sing and play the piano, and that was fun for my dad. He enjoyed that. She ended up spending about 1 year on hospice before she passed away. In the summer of 2021, my dad got sick with the virus. She ended up getting it as well. My husband and 2 of my 3 children had it at the same time as well. And I was on caregiver overload. Caregiver overload for sure. And being what it was, I had very limited to no help, because at that time, we didn't go around people with that sickness. Hospice was still coming in, but they would be fully suited up, and, they're limited on the time that they can spend and what they can do. And it's a story for another time, but My dad ended up passing away on August 1st, and it was 3 weeks later, on August 21st, that my mom finally was released from Alzheimer's disease. That's a long story to tell you that grief has been walking with me for years. There's different types of grief. You know, I'm walking the grief now of learning to live without them. But there's anticipatory grief that happened years before. And some would say that I should be over it all by now. I should have life figured out, and that should all be in my rear view mirror, but somehow it's not. And that's okay. That's okay. But I hope that sharing my story helps to heal my heart and maybe can give you hope for yours too. I hope on this channel that I can show you what walking and living with grief by your side can look like. Not every day is sad, not every day is hard, but there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about things. It's truly shaped who I am today, and I hope that together we can learn to walk this road and make something beautiful out of it. Will you join me on the journey? Let's keep on keeping on.